Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give it one more second, waiting for one more member from the council. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first meeting of the fiscal year 2026 Spending Affordability Committee. A little bit of housekeeping for the members at the table. Please, before you speak, make sure you turn on your microphones. And I would like to take an opportunity to thank the county's auditors and staff for the work that they've done since the last SAC meeting to now, and take some liberty at congratulating Lauren Smelkinson on your retirement. Is this your last SAC meeting?
This is.
Congratulations. I know we made comments last night, but I also just want to say that one is chairing the committee. I appreciate your candor, your openness, and your ability to walk me through processes that you've been dealing with your entire career, so that one, we can be more informed and work collaboratively to a result that has, I think, benefited the council and benefited the whole county. So thank you for your work. What are you going to be doing now that you're not going to be here?
To be determined.
Got it. Possibly involving pickleball, that I understand.
Pickleball for sure.
Excellent.
Yes.
Everyone, again, thank you for joining us. We've been here enough. I don't think we need to necessarily go around the table and introduce ourselves, but we'll start with approval of the minutes from the January 30th, 2024 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve? Has everyone had a chance to review them? That's been sent out with enough notice. And can I have a motion?
I'll motion.
A second? All right, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes passed. We'll move right to our consultant, Mr. Anirban Basu. Again, welcome back, and thank you for the work that you've done on behalf of the council and the county. So we'll go ahead and throw it to you.
Right. So, I often begin by talking as broadly as possible about the U.S. economy and then narrow down into Maryland and Baltimore County specific discussion. So I must say I have been quite surprised by the performance of the national economy over the last couple of years. It's vastly outperformed my expectations. I mean, I'm not alone, by the way, in having diminished expectations relative to what occurred. So back in October of 2022, the economists at Bloomberg, who maintain a forecasting index, indicated that their index was suggesting that the probability of recession in America was 100%. And you may be aware, and members of the audience may be aware, that that's the highest possible probability, that in fact you cannot get beyond 100%. That was a terrible year for the U.S. equity markets. It was the year that interest rates took off. The Federal Reserve began raising rates in March of 2022, March 17th of 2022, and all of these were thought to be precursors to a broad-based economic downturn. Simply has not occurred. Last year, 2023, the U.S. economy grows 2.5%. The projection right now, and of course we're almost through the year, is that the U.S. economy will end up growing 2.8% this year. A record stock market, tremendous wealth gains in both the financial markets and the housing market. We got retail sales today. Retail sales are up 0.7% in November, well ahead of expectations. So if you strip out auto sales, it was only 0.2%, but nonetheless, the consumer is still spending. That's 2/3 of the economy. Employers are still hiring. So in November, the nation added, according to the initial estimate from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 277,000 jobs. Unemployment nationally is 4.2%. We will enter 2025 with plentiful momentum. And of course, starting in September 18th of this year, the Federal Reserve began cutting interest rates. Now, many people will note that other interest rates, the non-short-term rates, the yield on the 10-year Treasury, those rates have actually been rising. But the expectation is that at some point, as the Federal Reserve continues to cut rates, and we might not see a lot of rate cutting next year. Ironically, we'll get a rate cut tomorrow. The Federal Reserve has a meeting that started today. It'll end tomorrow, and they'll make an announcement of a 0.25% rate cut. But in 2025, given the agenda of the new administration, the policy agenda of tariffs, tax cuts, and deportations, those are all quite inflationary. The one thing that might not be inflationary or disinflationary is deregulation, including of the U.S. energy sector. So that arguably, at least theoretically, could subtract from inflation. But by and large, the package that's being offered is pretty inflationary. I think we will get meaningful tariff increases next year, and I'll tell you why. The nation suffers a $36 trillion federal budget deficit. Donald Trump is desperate to cut tax rates once again, and he's got to make that balance. He's got to find new revenue sources. Well, tariffs are a way to get foreigners to pay more, and so those will help to finance his domestic tax cuts. And so I'm not saying that's good policy or bad policy. That's for other people to decide. But there's, that's inflationary, generally speaking, when we increase tariffs. And then, of course, tax cuts would inject more money into the economy, which is also inflationary. Again, not suggesting this is good or bad. That's for other people to decide. But it means that probably interest rates stay higher for longer in 2025. And the market actually expects that. Before September, when it was thought that Kamala Harris had a decent chance of winning, there was an estimation built into the bond market that the Federal Reserve would cut interest rates 6 times next year. The current bond market estimate is 2 times, maybe. So we'll see. So interest rates higher for longer, but would be, I think, the baseline expectation. Now, that said, the U.S. economy has done quite handsomely, as I say. Since February of 2020, which is a month before we shut down the U.S. economy, America's added 7 million jobs. Maryland has added a negative 18,300 jobs. To give you some sense of the underperformance of Maryland's economy vis-a-vis the balance of the country, I'll give you one simple example. Northern Virginia, between February of 2020 and October of 2024, added 87,000 jobs. There's a region of Maryland considered Maryland's DC suburbs, which include Montgomery, Prince George's, Frederick, Calvert, and Charles County. Over that same period, while Northern Virginia added 87,000 jobs, that region added 3,100 jobs, and almost all of that was in Frederick County. Probably more than 100% of that was in Frederick County. So this economy is just flat. If we move to Baltimore County, well, if we moved to Baltimore County, it would be quite unusual, wouldn't we? Because for the last couple of years, this county has lost population. The unemployment rate is a healthy 3.1% here, but that has a lot to do not with job creation, but the fact that so many people have left the labor force in the last few years. largely because of retirement. And so there are a lot of people who are still living here who are working pre-pandemic but now are retired. If to be unemployed, you have to be actively looking for work. We don't have as many people actively looking for work. And so despite the fact that the nation has outperformed expectations, Baltimore County hasn't. Why is that? Because we've not been able to accommodate a meaningful share of that growth. We just don't have the housing stock for it. We haven't had the population growth for it. And so the county is quite flat. Now, this Spending Affordability Committee has historically focused on income growth, personal income growth in particular. And our forecast for personal income growth is pretty impressive, actually, as it turns out. For the current fiscal year, 4.85%. For next fiscal year, meaning fiscal year 2026, 4.2%. And why is that? Because the wage and salary component of personal income, which is about half of personal income, much of the rest is things like Social Security payments or transfer payments generally, the wage and salary component is going to grow quite healthily because it is a tight labor market. Employers are still hiring, still looking for workers, and we see that in the wage estimations. But overall, the economy is a very slow growth economy, and so we find ourselves as a county in a bit of a predicament, trying to maintain our AAA bond rating even as our population declines. And so, and of course, one of the things that's happened also, we generate about, if memory serves, about $1 billion in income tax collections per year. Our general fund, again, if memory serves, around $2.8 billion. So we focus a lot on that 37% of the general fund that is comprised of income tax collections. But the fact of the matter is there are other items in the budget that are more problematic. And one of the issues that this county faces is the $1 billion shortfall, cash shortfall at the state level, and the $2.7 billion shortfall for the next fiscal year, as everyone knows. My presumption is the state will offer much less support to the counties. It doesn't want to raise taxes. So it might want to impose the need to raise taxes at the local level. Again, I'm not criticizing that. I'm simply saying that if I were a governor who is that handsome and running for president, and I'm going to have to campaign in Green Bay and in Milwaukee and in Grand Rapids and in Harrisburg, and they ask me as a candidate for president, what did you do for Maryland? And I say, I raised taxes. That doesn't work that well. And so I think a lot of pressure on the local government. Of course, we have a 36, as I say, $1 trillion national debt, and we've got Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk between rocket launches talking about cutting the federal budget by a third, from $6 trillion a year to $4 trillion. It's not going to happen, of course. But you've already heard about them eliminating the Department of Education and other kinds of things. And that would put more pressure, presumably, on the county, at least ultimately, to do things like fund BCPS and other enterprises within the county. So that's where we are. I think the outlook is pretty difficult for this county. We're not unique in that way, by the way. We're not unique at all in that way, but we have had softer growth in this county than many other counties around the country, and so we're not particularly well positioned for this moment in economic history. But in any case, the outlook for personal income is still above 4%, which is not bad by historic standards, especially in a county that's not adding population. And that's the report.
Questions for Mr. Basu?
What do you see happening? What do you see happening with the DOGE issue with employment in Montgomery County and the northern area? And it's a big number. It's a big economic number. And if that 10% comes to buy, 50% comes to buy, what do you expect?
Yeah, we've been saying this for years, right? That Maryland needed to diversify its economy, that as the national debt has climbed, that there would be a day of reckoning. But I don't think we knew that the day of reckoning, or thought the day of reckoning would be 2025, calendar year 2025. But DOGE, if memory serves, is Department of Government Efficiency, right? Again, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's a near billionaire, and Elon Musk, who last I checked was worth $400 billion, are clearly keen to have people lose their jobs as long as they're federal workers. And so we're talking about a lot less support for the bureaucracy. And notice that already federal government expenditures, patterns of expenditure have shifted over time. So once upon a time, the federal government spent a lot on the bureaucracy, delivering government services from the Washington metropolitan area, whether it was Department of Energy or Department of Commerce or Department of Education, whatever it happened to be. If you look at the major categories in the federal budget today, what's the number one category? Social Security. Well, Social Security, of course, is dispersed all across the country. There's nothing central about Maryland when you have that kind of expenditure. What's the second leading category in the federal budget? Interest on the debt. Well, that is not particular to Maryland either, and then you've got national defense, which has a heavy Maryland component, disproportionate, of course, a lot of contractors do, even more in Northern Virginia. And then you're talking about Medicare and the federal government share of Medicaid, but those expenditures are dispersed. And now the federal government is looking to try to shrink this budget deficit. The nominated Treasury Secretary is a guy named Scott Bessent. He's a hedge fund manager, and he's based I presume he's going to be approved by the Senate, but he has proposed the 3 threes. The 3 threes are what? He wants to raise oil production each day by 3 million barrels of oil per day. Well, that doesn't affect Maryland's economy. I mean, it might to the extent that gasoline prices fall, but that's true. But, from a production perspective, would not tend to impact us. He wants the U.S. economy to grow 3% a year. Well, okay, fine. And tax cuts maybe are part of that catalyst. And then he wants to shrink the federal budget deficit to 3% of GDP, which right now is 7%. How are you going to do that? You really, no one wants to touch Social Security. No one wants to touch Medicare politically. Interest on the debt is what interest on the debt is, and the world is getting more dangerous. Governments are falling by the day. I think yesterday was Germany, the day before was Syria, so on and so forth. So the world is getting to be more of a dangerous place. Canada, of course, Justin Trudeau is right on the verge, right? So, and Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom is one of the least popular politicians in the history of mankind. So, the world is getting more unstable, more dangerous. Not going to really be able to cut defense expenditures that much. And so, what do you cut? You end up cutting things like Department of Education, Department of Energy, so on and so forth. That has NIH, FDA. That has a Maryland footprint. So we are no longer disproportionately benefiting from the federal government expenditures the way we once were, but we will disproportionately suffer from the costs the cuts that are likely to be proposed. So we're in really tough shape. I think Michigan in the early 2000s, Michigan's recession lasted basically 10 years. From 2001 on, they were in recession. What was their number one industry? Auto industry. What was it doing at that time? Consolidating. Ultimately, General Motors and Chrysler go bankrupt. I'm not saying it's going to be that dire, but there's an analogy to be made there. Our number one industry is the federal government. It's no longer the economic driver that it once was. It won't be. In fact, it's going to subtract from economic growth. Our leading engine of economic growth in recent decades has been Montgomery County. Montgomery County has been flat for years. That's 1/6 of Maryland's population. They're dead in the water. Prince George's County last year lost population. Baltimore County lost population. Baltimore City loses 500 people a month. So when, there are some good stories in Maryland. You hear about, Frederick is booming. That's true. There are parts of Cecil County that are doing nicely. Sometimes you hear a nice story out of Caroline County. Hagerstown is doing well, and people are doing more deals in Salisbury. But otherwise, the state is really in ragged shape. And final point about this, you may be aware that Moody's already gave a warning with respect to our AAA bond rating. And it's about to get much worse, probably.
To the state. Yeah.
To the state, yeah, state. State AAA bond rating, right.
Councilman.
I'm looking at page 11 of your report. St. Louis is leading in growth. I view St. Louis as very similar to Baltimore, particularly St. Louis County and St. Louis City. How in the world is St. Louis growing like that?
They are an industrial center. So you might be looking at a slide that says leading markets in terms of construction employment growth. I don't know if that's construction employment growth. So if you look at the leading markets in the country in terms of construction employment growth since February of 2020, it's markets like St. Louis, Detroit, Chicago, big Midwestern markets, that's supply chain. So it's lots of investment made in the supply chain in America, and disproportionately that's on the heartland. And so we don't have that kind of investment here. There's the exception, Trade Point Atlantic, right? That's been a major source of growth for us. But now that Trade Point Atlantic is largely built out, where does the next generation of growth come from in this county? And you can see where we rank on that list. We don't rank highly on that list, as it turns out. Baltimore Metro, 23rd out of 25 major metropolitan areas. So, again, soft growth. There's a strong correlation, generally speaking, between population growth and employment growth. But when you look at the construction markets, it's really about mega projects. It's about large data centers, manufacturing facilities. You don't see a lot of those around here. They're talking about data centers in Frederick. They're talking about data centers, of course, in Calvert County and elsewhere. And those are big taxpayers, by the way. But especially if you have a personal property tax that applies to that equipment. But in any case, like I say, I don't love being pessimistic. I mean, I really don't. People say, I don't want to hang out with you, boss, because you're always so glum. And I know I am, but the data are what the data are. And I just don't think, it's just inescapable that we have some issues in front of us.
You'd mentioned about the $18,000 jobs lost. Any particular sector, or was it all across?
The question, any particular sector, a lot of segments have lost jobs. By the way, it's actually worse than it sounds, because the leading job adder, and it was a segment that added a lot of jobs in the last few years, is government. So you break down that negative 18,300 by sector, government actually added a ton of jobs. So the private sector did even worse, but it's all kinds of industries, and manufacturing, financial services, lots of consolidation in financial service. I mean, we used to be home to an Alex Brown, a Legg Mason, so on and so forth. And so when you have that kind of consolidation, it leads to a lot of job loss. We've had, it's very hard to find a significant Maryland-based bank anymore, right? They've been acquired, right? They've been consolidated, First National Bank of Pennsylvania. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, that's the source of job loss. So it really is pretty broad-based. Health services also added jobs, which health services added jobs everywhere across the country. But most segments, construction has been very weak. Other segments of the economy have been very, very weak. And part of that is not because there's not demand for these workers, by the way, is because expanding employers looking for that workforce can't find the people to hire. So to create a job, you need a love connection. You need, of course, an employer who says, I need to fill this job opening, but then you need someone to happen along with the right set of knowledge, skills, and abilities to, make that work. And when you got a 3.1% unemployment rate in Baltimore County, and much actually meaningfully lower in other parts of the state, Carroll County, Howard County, in the mid-twos, that kind of thing, this is where we are.
Are you including the injection of AI into your projection?
So the question about artificial intelligence, I'm really not. Because we're talking about 1 or 2 fiscal years, and if I presume the impact of artificial intelligence is over the course of many, many years. I did mention data centers, of course. That's one of the short-term manifestations of this AI boom. Is these hyperscalers can't get enough data storage and data processing capacity. But I think from day to day. I mean, let me ask you this: how much did AI change your life today? And how much has it changed over the last week?
Not for me, because I've listened to some people who are talking about what you put in it, like what AI is pulling out is what we put in. So if you don't put anything in it, then it's not going to give you anything. So right. I don't put anything, but these industries are.
Yeah, fair enough, right? It's changing accounting, it's changing, computer programming. It is having an effect.
Yes.
Yeah, it's changing diagnostics and healthcare. No question, don't get me wrong. But it's not necessarily over the course of a year or even 2 years. I mean, I think you will see an acceleration of the impact, these use cases, so on and so forth. And certainly it's had an impact on the stock market. I mean, look, if we'd invested in Palantir stock, we're done, we can retire like her. But
additional question or add-on?
Yeah, good.
One, we don't have the paradise in Maryland, probably line approved going up towards Pennsylvania. We don't have the generation plants that AI needs. They're now going into, certainly into nuclear on their own basis. Heck, somebody's trying to buy the old Peach Blossom plant, and mainly, I think it's Google or Microsoft. So we're not situationed well to attract a lot of that production side of those centers because we don't have the infrastructure anymore. But going back to tariffs, Maryland's a big trading point, as you pointed out, our area. How do you see, tariffs are one of those oddball things. We got the 1890s that almost took the country under. We got the great flower game that went on in the 1100s or 1200s in Europe and Holland. Do you see the tariffs? We're going to pay for it. The other countries, yes, it will change some of the employment base, maybe a little bit over a long period of time. But from the consumer side, we all know that a tariff bill is a sales tax in essence. And that is going to skew an awful lot of, particularly trade coming through this port structure, potentially. Also given that, it will. And have you factored in anything there, or is it too speculative at this point in time?
Look, it's too speculative from the perspective of knowing exactly what Donald John Trump is going to do, right? Because his acolytes with whom I speak, or devotees, say, don't take the gentleman literally, take him seriously. So you know where he wants to push things. He wants more domestic production here. I'm trained as an economist, so we don't like, generally speaking, barriers to trade. We hate them, in fact. But America is special in many ways. We're about 24% of global output, and we already had these targeted tariffs during the first Trump administration, steel and aluminum. And how did the world respond to that? Well, part of it was, countervailing duties on our exports. We had that bit of a tit for tat, especially with the Chinese. But a lot of the response was, well, we'll just bring our production to America, and we'll still, we'll get the most favorable tariff treatment. So industrial production in this country, last few months have been different, but has generally soared. Manufacturing capacity is up in America, and you've got $250 billion worth of computer chip manufacturing facilities under development in this country. Some of that's because of the Biden administration. The Chips and Science Act was signed by him in August of 2022, and that same month he signed the Inflation Reduction Act. So lots of subsidies for manufacturers, battery manufacturers, so on and so forth. And so lots of industries come into America, and part of it is because the input suppliers, steel and aluminum suppliers, are now here. They weren't here before. Before, the notion was, I want to put my assembly plant in China. Why? Because my suppliers are in China. The supply chain's over there. Why would I put it in America? Then they have to get my inputs all shipped over here, then assemble them, and then it doesn't make any sense, not cost efficient.
Also the wage base.
Wage, environmental issues, cost of land, cost of all kinds of things, electricity, whatever it happened to be, all cost disadvantage. But now what's happening is people are saying, oh, gosh, the supply chain effects of the pandemic, I want to simplify my logistics, I don't want to deal with the Pacific Ocean, I can't use the Suez Canal right now because I've got Houthi rebels, Somali pirates, shipping insurance costs are way up, and so I want to produce closer to my final customer. And we have the largest customer base in the world. And then you add in the Canadians and the Mexicans. People ignore them. Canada's the 10th largest economy in the world. Mexico is 15th.
Biggest trading partners.
Yeah, I mean, North America is huge. So economically, you put it all together, we will see more tariffs, and guess what's going to happen when they put tariffs on EVs manufactured in China or whatever it is manufactured in Japan, steel, et cetera. They're ready to bring more production to the United States. I'll give you a very good example, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. They're bringing their chip manufacturing to the United States, and Arizona, as it turns out, 3 fabrication plants. Not because America has comparative advantage in chip manufacturing relative to Taiwan, we probably don't, but there's a national security issue here, right? China's here, Taiwan's there, that's one, and they want to bring some of that capacity to a place that's safe. But the second thing is, there are tariffs out there, and there are federal subsidies out there that TSMC has received, about $6 billion of subsidies. So now they're in Arizona. And I think, the Trump administration, learning from that first 4 years in office, said, look, people complain about tariffs, but the world seems to be responding the way we want them to, which is they're going to bring the production to America.
It did for a while in the history books too, but it sure got scaled up in the 1900s, late 1800s.
I'm with you. I think the tulips, by the way, were the 1600s. But the point is, what can I tell you? Everything I learned in economics says this is a terrible idea, these tariffs. It'll make us poor, it'll make the rest of the world poor, it makes war more likely. All these lessons we learned during and after World War II have been forgotten, which is we want to trade, not go to war, right? We want to have things like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization, bring the world together. You profit, I profit, now we don't go to war. That's sort of the notion. That's falling apart, that structure. It's very upsetting to many of us, don't get me wrong, but we lived through 4 years of the Trump administration. The economy was not bad. The unemployment rate reached a 50-year low, as it turns out. Industrial production has come back to America. This reshoring has accelerated. So I'm saying that there's negatives and there are benefits. One of the negatives is it's inflationary. One of the positives is it probably brings more industrial capacity to the United States.
So for the work before us.
Yes.
And taking requests and or recommendations from the committee, what can you, we can gather from the report and everything else, but just the key things we should be keeping in mind as we think about what the recommendation is and what our final decision is going to be by the end.
Number one is you've got to somehow hunt for efficiencies wherever they exist. And I know that there's this very tired narrative that there's all this waste in government, so on and so forth. By and large, when people come in on platforms saying, I'm going to cut waste from government, they have actually a very difficult time finding that waste, as it turns out, historically. And Baltimore County historically has operated pretty efficiently, lean and quite mean, as it turns out. So, but that's one, you've got to exploit those efficiencies. Number two, I know there's going to be a temptation to raise tax rates here. But this is a county that's already hemorrhaging population. And hemorrhaging is too strong a word, it's losing population. But there's an issue here. Number three, we need to revive economic development in this county. I mean, we have underinvested in economic development for too long. We need to market ourselves much more aggressively. We're on the East Coast of the United States. You won't find a denser economic corridor than the northeastern United States. We're right here in the middle of it. What are we doing? Shrinking in terms of size. It doesn't make any sense. So that's one. That, you know, and this is on the second floor of the Economic Development Office. They need to be supercharged and high-powered. I think they have good leadership, by the way, but they don't have the kind of resources that they need to really spread the message that Baltimore County is in business. And then, you know, fourth, I've said it many times, housing policy here, my goodness. We need more housing, we need more density, we need to embrace more young families. You know, I know a former councilman was complaining about, you know, we've downzoned every property. So I don't want to get into the politics of it. But the point is, we need to find a way to accommodate people at price points they can afford. And I'm not talking about subsidized affordable housing. I know that's a, you know, but what I'm talking about is young families able to move here, younger people who are going to start a business able to move here. And right now they're locked out of this market and they're sitting in York, Pennsylvania with nothing to do.
Right. Well, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, the data shows that we've lost population, but from a standpoint too of our traditional communities that folks want to move into, when there is an available home, people will move into it. It's not for lack of folks not wanting to be here. It's for a fact of not being able to find a place to live here, which still says that we have all those things that folks want, but we're not providing the opportunity for folks to then come here where the overall our county will benefit and puts us in a better economic position.
Yeah, we're home to many great American communities. You know, I'm amazed every time I go to Catonsville what a fabulous place that is. Or Owings Mills, or Hunt Valley, or White Marsh. I mean, you know, Dundalk and Essex, you know, all of them have their own charm, their own personality. So we can leverage that. But we haven't been doing that sufficiently. And boy, we're going to have to work much, much harder. And it would be nice to get a mega project or two. So one of the things that economic development can do is try to think about deal making. You know, there have been a lot of economic development professionals over time who basically have been real estate developers, but not really real estate developers. They've empowered real estate developers to invest aggressively in a particular county. And what they do is they do site development, and they think about zoning, and can we attract a semiconductor manufacturing facility? Can we attract a $2 or $3 billion plant and create a new technological ecosystem here? That's what it's going to take, I think, for us to turn the corner and to live with these cuts from other levels of government that are going to impact our quality of life here.
So if I could, do you have another?
Just the question of since we're dealing with affordability here, there's a lot of observations that you've made. One, certainly in the economic development, you've had, I think, a number of years of consistency that we are underusing our land, that we've got too much land banked. Do you still hold that position?
Well, I want to be careful about that. So I view the ERDL as sacred, basically. You know, I love the fact that we work so hard as a county to maintain our rural heritage. But I would say we have to be much more aggressive in terms of infill redevelopment. So when you've got an area like Lutherville Station, we've got to figure that out. Whatever is going to happen, something's got to happen. Right? And and yes, it takes community input and the developer has to cooperate, all those kinds of things. I get that. But at the end of the day, it is not an acceptable outcome for nothing to happen. Because that means lost tax base, lost economic activity. We just can't afford to keep doing that anymore, just kicking that can down the road. It's not going to work. We have to make some decisions here. We have to energize this economic base. So, yeah, but I do not want to make the suggestion, you know, like a lot of home builders, of course, just want to open up the ERDL and just build and pave the whole place over. I think that would be disastrous from a quality of life perspective. And not good for our water quality, ecology, all those kinds of things. But I think there's lots of opportunity to develop within Owings Mills and Towson and the broader communities around the county.
Back on the affordability issue,
Yeah.
Talked about the slow growth. Our personal income growth is not bad. Our job growth is horrible. Our unemployment is very good, but we're not increasing the labor force participation rate much at all because of the age structure in parts. There's not many people left unless I go back to work, which I don't plan to. But I do think the affordability issue, the questions that the council has to face right now, you got the state who's put it, I don't know if anybody read that last Department of Legislative Services debt affordability study.
2.7 billion.
You almost want to gag on what they're thinking of in terms of the context of cutbacks. That impacts your whole school system. You know, it's not much on your general fund, but it's more than linear. meaning that even though it doesn't affect your budget, when the school board gets cut back, who do they scream to? You guys. So affordability is a big issue. In terms of taxes, yeah, it's a horrible thought, but you got to do something along the way. And the liability pressures that are on the county and the council now, I sit on the retirement board. I mean, that unfunded liability, because people have kicked the can down and haven't filled it, and also have changed some of the underlying assumptions that went on into the matrix of what was the unfunded liability. But it's, that 79% of funded is still sitting out there. It's not going to go away. You're not going to grow it out of investment, not at least easy, unless we bought into the NVIDIA and put all the money into that and wrote it up. But I guess I'm back to saying to you all as the council, you've got some questions of whether the affordability of what's being proposed, in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, of what's coming into your new budget, to be cautious. I think if you jam this forward, nobody has grown themselves out of a revenue problem inside their budget by spending a hell of a lot of money. There was a big article that just came out this morning nationally. Don't get sucked into this, spend a lot of money and you're going to make a lot of money. That the feedback effect is not good. So again, as you approach affordability this year, is being mindful of, do you need to do everything so fast? Do you need to do everything so heavy? And I've read the executive's numbers. I've got my opinions on them, which I'll voice for whatever it is. But to be very cautious on money. The city is proposing a large increase for water and sewer users. Again, it's going to affect you all.
Right. I appreciate you bringing us back, because I appreciate it because I was about to ask the same thing, with the risk of oversimplifying your entire report. The national economy seems to be doing well, but there's uncertainty associated with transition in a new administration. We as a county and a state aren't matching that same growth or same economic activity. We've lost jobs. Income growth is high. We have good unemployment, but there's uncertainty associated with industries that are leaving that we don't have and affordability for housing is down. All of this leading to uncertainty, bringing it back to us, where we have to factor all these things in to determine what we can afford and what we can't, and how fast we want to move, all under the umbrella of the fact that we are choosing a new county executive who will also have their own and dictate a lot of the direction and speed of which we're moving forward with our capital projects and our spending for our county. So all that to be considered. Thank you.
There's some good news. Just one last thing.
Please.
I want to end on an optimistic note, which is, I've not said anything optimistic thus far. Residential real property tax collection should be very strong, right? Because we've seen a lot of growth in assessed values, and there's a cap on how much, all of that kind of stuff, how much a property tax bill can climb per year for a principal owner. And then, a resident homeowner. And then the other thing is that if mortgage rates fall, and maybe they won't fall very aggressively in 2025, but in 2026, I think you'll see a crescendo of sales volume. Because a lot of pent-up demand to both sell and buy homes. A lot of people fixed in at that low mortgage rate during the pandemic. The tail is wagging the dog. They'd like to move out of that home, but they're not going to yet because they don't want to give that mortgage rate. But at some point by 2026, perhaps, mortgage rates will be low enough that people want to sell that home. There's lots of people willing to buy those homes. So all of a sudden, recordation and transfer tax collections go up. Bless you.
Bless you.
So thank you for, again, your time as always, the report, giving us a good starting point, as this is the first meeting that we'll have leading into the 2026 fiscal decisions. We will, keep using you as we always have for your insight. And it was brought up too, before we finish, I just want to also point out that thank you for talking about the unfunded liabilities related to our pension system. I'm proud of the work that the committee's done before I got here and afterwards to make sure that we are on pace to meet it. Folks had kicked the can down the road for too long. I think every year, as long as I've been here, we've consistently addressed it so that we're in the right place in the future. Because there were decisions that were made that put us in a tough position, and we're still there, but moving out of it. And I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do and your insights and ability to try and work there. We're not there yet, but we're going to keep working towards it. And we haven't taken our eye off the ball and making sure that we're getting as close as possible to a manageable and conservative approach to how we're funding it and the level it should be. So thanks for bringing it up.
Keep your eyes open as you look at the new budget.
Yes, right. So with that, thank you, sir. We will move on to our auditors to give the general fund fiscal updates. Liz Irwin.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Basu. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Okay, first I'm going to hand out a couple schedules from the council's budget message, just to remind everybody where we were with compliance. I didn't take some for myself. Okay. So one's the spending guideline. And you can see that there was the compliance there with the numerical guideline, and then the debt guidelines as well, the debt service coming in just under $20 million under that guideline, and then the total debt guideline coming in well under the guideline. I would just pointing out that our debt guidelines, we exclude component unit capital leases. And if you looked at the PRAG report, the debt affordability study that was attached to our email, and it's posted on the county's website, those figures include those component unit capital leases. So there's a little bit of a difference there in terms of where we're ending the current fiscal year as projected based on that. But this committee has long ago adopted a policy that excluded component unit capital leases, mainly because, as I recall, they're not under the control of our budget office. These are leases that are determined by the school system within their general fund budget. And
Right. And we've talked before, what is the fair difference since they incorporated and we left it out?
it's just additional debt so it's not a complete apples to apples comparison.
Okay.
I mean, there is compliance with the committee's debt service guideline for this fiscal year as the committee calculates it.
Understood. Gotcha.
So I'm just pointing that out in case there was confusion there with the numbers that are in the PRAG report. And then the spending guideline, comes in there just under, so really the budget just under the guideline. And every year you have a situation where they don't fully spend up to the budget. So every year you have the actual spending coming in, more, further below the guideline than is reflected at the beginning going into the year. So these are the going into the year schedules. Okay, so and I'm going to hand out another thing here, which is colorful. And these are just some basic numbers. Okay, so you can be looking at this while I give the general fund fiscal update. And I'm going back to FY23 because this is the first time to be reporting on FY23 since that annual comprehensive financial report came out. FY23 general fund revenues based on the audited financial records totaled approximately $2.62 billion. That's the first yellow box that you can see there on your handout, an increase of $140 million or 5.7% over FY22 revenues. The positive revenues performance, along with budget savings of roughly $37 million, yielded a $23 million fund balance drawdown for the fiscal year. And so you can see that $23 million fund balance drawdown, that's the first orange box there. And that compares to what going into that year. And, I'm back, we're sort of rewinding a couple years, but just to kind of bring us up to speed with where we are, you can see that what happened in FY23 is that the budget was anticipating drawing down the fund balance by over $165 million. That's to the left of that orange box there. And so that's extra in the fund balance. Okay, so that experience in FY23 resulted in unassigned fund balance of 431 million plus approximately 250 million in the revenue stabilization reserve account. And then there were also some liquidations, which you can see that was part of what went into the final surplus numbers. So you ended up with a surplus in the 27% of revenues range, which you can see there. In FY24, our present unofficial FY24 revenue estimate, I know they're working on closing up the books there, is $2.67 billion, an increase of approximately 55 million or 2.1% over FY23 collections. So you can see that 2.767 billion in that yellow box under FY24. And originally, both our office and the budget office were anticipating a general fund revenue decline for FY24, but income tax collections remained strong. There was steady growth in property tax collections and continued growth in investment income that was, related to sort of the higher interest rates and healthy cash on hand balances. So in addition to higher than budgeted revenues, spending for FY24 was about 30 million below the budget. And you can see that's sort of between the second yellow and orange there. You can see that where the spending, if you compare that 2681.1 to the 2710 to the left of it, that's where spending came in a little bit, below the budget and ending up with the drawdown of fund balance of in the $10 million range as opposed to what the budget anticipated, which again was more if you go to the left of that.
When you say below the budget, do you look at it on the issue that, do you do an encumbrance that even though that they didn't spend it in this year, they encumbered it for the future and it's not really truly available?
No.
It runs an encumbrance budget amongst other things, just curiosity.
No, this is a projection, the projected fund balance drawdown. And so,
Coming out of a year that you've got a quote surplus, that somebody has a budget of $100 million. They only spend 90 million of that. That difference might still be encumbered because they've still got things that they're trying to do out there. So how does that get reconciled in as?
those encumbrances are, when I say $30 million, it was actually, if you don't include the encumbrances, it was more like 40 million. So.
I'm not trying to make it hard, but it's, it's one of those
Right.
ones that what's real surplus and what's.
30 million reflects the encumbrances as well.
Right.
So it's kind of, assuming that those will flow out the door. And budget office can correct me anywhere that they think I'm wrong. Just scream if you think I'm wrong. Okay. Okay, so moving in, so where are we, at the end of FY24? Fund balance of 671 million as of June 30th, 2024, roughly. This is not audited yet, so that's where it is, about 26%. And that's including that revenue stabilization reserve account, which has to be at the 10%. For the current fiscal year, preliminarily, the budget's FY25 revenue estimate is $2.57 billion. This is what's budgeted, a decrease of approximately $97 million or 3.6% from the FY24 unofficial total. So conservative projections there in the budget. We were a bit ahead, a little bit higher for our estimate at budget time. But we were still also anticipating, along with the budget office, that FY25 revenues would reflect a decrease from FY24. But so far, FY25 is looking better than expected, with our November income tax distribution coming in significantly above expectations. Even before the November distribution, the Office of Budget and Finance, as of October, was projecting 2.64 billion. That's the yellow figure there. So I'm showing for the revised estimate, that's the number that was in the debt affordability study. And then for the expenditures, the green there, that's just assuming the whole budget is spent, rather than assuming that they come in under, which they usually do. So you can see the difference between the budgeted fund balance drawdown of 215 million, that's the planned drawdown, mostly for pay-go, mostly for one-time excluded items, not completely. There was a little bit of it that was towards ongoing in this particular budget. But right now, that projection's down to, based on Office of Budget and Finance's October forecast of being like under $150 million, that orange box there, $147.5 million. So, which is more than reflect, I mean, that's all one-time items. So that's sustainable. Like, my point is that we're in a sustainable place right now as far as projections for 2025. Okay. And then, we're in process with our projections for FY25 and 26, because obviously we do a projection for 26, and, trying to run some scenarios there in light of these risks that everybody's talking about and just our usual projecting. So that's my fiscal update, and then I was going to move into the spending guideline, if anybody has any questions first about.
Any questions related to the fiscal update? Go ahead, move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
So for the, I didn't hand out a schedule yet because we really don't have it done up yet, but the spending guideline is a recommendation for the maximum level of general fund spending for ongoing purposes. The spending guideline typically is calculated by multiplying the previous year's estimated base spending by a multi-year average of personal income growth factor. Last year, the committee utilized, as you may recall, a blended average of county-level personal income forecasts by SAGE Policy Group, their 5-year average, and Moody's Analytics 3-year average for development of the 4.36% growth factor. Looking at SAGE's most recent report, the October 15th one that we were just discussing, that was included in the email, the preliminary 4-year average FY23 to 26, the personal income growth rate factor for FY 2020 to 26 is 4.93%. $129 million growth would be allowed by that. And the preliminary 5-year average is more like 3.98% or $104 million growth. So we're just running the different scenarios. Like if you were to use a 4-year average, that kind of like chops off that year where it was a low year. But then if you use the 5-year average, you're still capturing that lower year. The Office of Budget and Finance noted that the current Moody's forecast that it's been looking at as of November is a bit higher at 5.21%. That would yield $136 million. So this is just giving you some general ideas of where we are with possible guidelines. And so we're ranging from about $103 million to $136 million. And typically we compare that growth to anticipated revenues for the upcoming year because we wouldn't want to be recommending a guideline for ongoing spending that is, out of line with what we're expecting to bring in revenue. And then I'm going to move on to the debt guidelines.
How do you, when you're looking at which average, and we've all gone through this for a couple of years, 5 years, 3 years, 8 years, 10 years, geometric, non-geometric, the question on the coming off of the pandemic where things went down and things came back, how are you handling, how do you recommend handling, do you think that big growth increment that was a few years ago coming off of the pandemic should be included in because it was an oddball? Or should we take a 3-year or 4-year net out the one as we've done in the past?
We've done a blended average, right? Because we've taken consideration that it was sort of a blip and so it's correct? Or?
More than anything, we've erred on because of the fund balances that we've had. And honestly, the spending needs, the real needs that we've had for, to stay competitive, to attract, we've seemed to, appreciate the spending needs, the need for salaries and all, and have been, as long as there's revenue and there's fund balance, that we can, it's all kind of an estimation anyway, and we can do some sort of average that may take out the year that's the low year, abnormally low.
In terms as you
Absolutely. Right.
Last year, we took one that was the 5, one that was the 3, but really both had the same effect of canceling out that 4-year average. So they both, it was just a different way of canceling out the 4-year average, which was reflective of the down, that lower
Now
year.
we're moving into another period that we don't
Right.
go back on the floor.
It will be interesting.
We'll be back in.
No, it will be interesting in future years where we don't have to take in consideration like how that year, which was uncertain and also was sort of an outlier, doesn't affect our projections. But yeah, I think we've taken into consideration, but also tried to make the best guess possible. It's that way, but in terms of a moving target, factoring it into our considerations.
The difficulties you have, and I understand the workforce and employment basis, and everybody wants to be paid more. But from the pension side, for every COLA that you, like your January 1, and that can't be rescinded or anything else like that, you're committing yourself as you go forward, particularly in where I'm concerned, I think where Anibon was concerned, it's 27, 28, and 29, and what's going to happen, because there's so much, who knows exactly what the hell's going on. You'll find out what the state's going to do in January or, April, when they finish up. But to be very cautious that you just haven't committed yourself to a fast run rate on some of these things before you really know where it's coming from. And things look pretty good right now. 25, this fiscal year is going to be nice. I think it's going to be very attractive.
And
6, it's going to be a little more fuzzy, but I think it can be okay because all these other variables that we've thrown out today that Anibon's put out and others have put out, you're not going to see them play out for a while, other than super tariffs, but I think that's still got time to go.
And I would note, though, that the committee does also make its spending policy recommendations, which are just as important as the guideline itself, because it talks about, not using surplus for one-time expenses, or not using surplus for ongoing expenses.
To be
So,
cautious in the debt service.
right?
You're already bumped up at the top, and the administration would like to raise that service ratio that you've already got to higher from the 9% range to over 10, and to be cautious in that range, because if there's a change in general funds in the following year thereafter, you're going to go right through the policy guideline.
Right.
10.5.
I was just about to talk about the debt
Liz, I was going to say, if you want to
Perfect
continue.
transition. The debt guidelines are based on 2 common debt affordability indicators. The policies for the county's 2 debt guidelines are: debt service should not exceed 9.5% of total general fund revenues, and total debt outstanding should not exceed 2.5% of total assessed property value. And I already mentioned that historically the committee's excluded the component unit capital leases, so I'm not going to go into that again. But I would also note, though, that in recent years, our total debt for consolidated public improvements, that's actually been going down because we've been putting so much PAYGO into the capital budget that we haven't had to issue as much debt. And debt service there's an increase in FY25, but really that has to do with a technical issue of bringing the interest offset to not stop. They stopped doing the interest offset for using the bond premium funds. So, which is a recommendation of the committee. So actually, the increase in debt service in FY25 is not related to increased debt. It's related to actually complying with a spending affordability recommendation, which was to reflect the full amount of the debt service in the general fund budget, rather than just like that net amount. And so it's actually, that's a good job. We're happy about that. And still we're keeping our eye, of course, on these debt ratios because there is a huge capital program out there. I mean, the voters just approved a lot. And even though that's not made its way, the next step is for that to go into a budget. And then, later you kind of have to pay for it with the issuance of the actual debt. And you hope to have as much PAYGO as you can. We are seeing, some, as I've said, additional fund balance from the experience over the past few years, and that's good. But it's a balancing act. So that's where that stands.
Questions from Ms. Irwin? Or comments?
always make comments, but you're right. The authorization, the debt side is out there, but that isn't the real cash flow, and you know it as well as I do. The difficulty with just the way you do your budgeting, in my view, here versus what we used to do it in my days going by at MDOT. We would take a 5-year CIP and really look at the cash flow, just not the authorizations, in terms of what you really needed, so that you didn't get yourself out for any political reason, that we're throwing a lot of debt out, because once you're issuing off of the debt on need to cash, because you can't arbitrage it anymore, meaning you can't have $100 million, you can't put it into 13% bonds, taxable bonds. So I think that the cautionary point of view is when you look at, in my view, again, the exec's budget for capital, is to be cautious on how much real need for money is. Not saying that the projects aren't worth it. No, that's not the point. I think it's the timing thereof and the cash that then looking at your cash flow off your capital accounts, that you got an awful lot of cash out there. And I don't think you've got all the information you all need on how many contracts have been let. How many contracts, it's nice to have all this money, but if they're still slow on that, the hell are you borrowing for? It's not because of low interest rates. I could see that a couple of years ago, but
Yeah,
not now.
that is.
Not now.
We were having a similar conversation prior to the meeting, but you're spot on too. I think, as mentioned, we'll have a new county executive that's also going to be playing the lion's share, the main role in determining, what projects are priorities, need to be funded, as long as we're making sure that we're keeping our commitments to projects that have already been committed to. So I think look forward to working with the new administration, but also the current members of OBF, and appreciate the collaboration leading up to now and the continued collaboration. Last year, first time chairing the committee, it was refreshing to work with you and your staff to figure out where we could get, the needs and the expectations the committee met, as well as the needs of the administration. So look forward to continuing that collaboration this year. This is the preliminary discussion related to the fiscal year 2026 budget, and this is our first meeting. Before I start moving towards closing, if anybody has any comments or questions or concerns they'd like to bring up beforehand. No, well, I appreciate your all's time. I want to point out that the next meeting of the Spending Affordability Committee will be on January 8th at 3:30 p.m. in this chamber.
No, Lauren.
Without Lauren Smelkinson.
Oh, well.
But she'll be paying, she won't be far. She won't be far. Again, appreciate your time. We're just a little over an hour. Want to keep everybody's time is precious, and we appreciate that you're providing your expertise to us. Sorry, Councilman Jones. Councilman Jones?
Yes, I'm good.
Go ahead. Did you want to, sorry, I apologize. Did you want to say something?
No, I did not. No, I
Okay, no worries.
was
I didn't wanna
listening. I appreciate everybody's participation as well. We're good.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And Liz, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank my staff. They're awesome. And thanks Budget and Finance too.
All right, is that a
They're awesome
motion?
too.
Motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? All right, thank you, everybody.